My name is Eddie Coy Ybarra. I grew up here in this neighborhood, which was known as Germantown. This was the melting pot of the immigrants. The people that lived here were Germans, Polish, Italian, Hispanics, and blacks. This was a beautiful neighborhood when I was young. I lived with my grandma. That street over there is Labor Street. Labor Street intersected with Goliath Street, which is this street right behind me. At this corner right here, there was a liquor store called Locke's Liquor Store. We lived 4 houses down on Goliath Street, which would be where the Texan Cultural Institute is at. And if you continue going east on Goliath Street, you would find that George Waite's supermarket was at that corner. Across the street from that store was a drugstore called Heinz Drugstore. That street was called Santa Clara Street. And if you continued going down Santa Clara Street, you would eventually hit Wyoming Street. On the left side of Wyoming Street, there was a school called Burnett Elementary School, which was Big Burnett. That's the school that I attended. If you continued then going towards town, going west on Wyoming Street, you would find a building that belonged to Radheim Shalom Temple. There, if you continue walking, and that's how we had to go in order to get to Matagorda Street. And at that corner, there was OK Bar. If you turn right on Matagorda Street and you walk down probably maybe 4 blocks down, you would get to Lafitte Street. That's where Little Burnett Elementary School was at. That's where I attended as well. The neighborhood, like I said earlier, it was a very good neighborhood, safe. When my grandmother received notice that she had to vacate the house because of Hemisfair, she was brokenhearted. And I personally feel that she never really recovered from having to leave the neighborhood. She cried and she told us that this is where her children grew up in this house at 526 Goliath. This is where we grew up as children. So once again, we have some beautiful memories that I have about this neighborhood. Even though I have the mental memories, I just wish we could have had some of the structures that I grew up in so that I could take my family and just show them where I grew up, okay? From what I understand, there were close to 2,300 businesses, residential areas or houses that were demolished. Over close to 700 businesses as well. And from what I have heard, the Conservation Society wanted to save at least 200 structures, and they only ended up saving 20. So that in itself is sad. According to my cousin George, he said around 1965 is when we vacated the house. At that time, I was already much older. I was already close to 20 years old. And by that time, I was no longer living with my grandma. But I do remember reading in the papers about the Tadduz family, how they had to actually be evicted by the sheriff's office because they didn't want to leave. So I'm sure that it created a lot of heartache for some of the residents, just like it did for my grandma. But we did what needed to be done. The eminent domain came into being, and we had no choice but to leave.
Where did your grandma go?
We moved not too far. We moved on Camargo Street.
Okay.
And we only stayed there. She only stayed there about 3 years, and then they moved further west. And but by then, my grandma wasn't feeling very well.
How old is she?
She was when all of this happened, she must have been in her 70s, and she lived to be up to 82, but in bad health. Yeah.
Do you feel like that removal impacted her health?
Yes, I do. I feel that the moving impacted her health. It created a lot of heartache, like I said earlier, and a lot of stress that you shouldn't have at that age.
Right.
The most I remember, to be honest with you, is the elementary schools that I attended. Little Burnett, which was at Lafitte and Matagorda Street, was a school that I can still remember my grandma walking me to my first grade class with Mrs. Davis. And I don't know if Mrs. Davis thought that I was under a lot of stress on my grandma because that was my first day. So she told my grandma, you can sit next to Eddie and then you can decide when to leave. So after a little while I turned to my grandma and I said, Grandma, you can leave now. That's one memory that I will always cherish.
Yeah.
And then the other was at Big Burnett. I really enjoyed Big Burnett. Little Burnett, you attended class or school first to the third grade. That's why we called it Little Burnett. Big Burnett, 4th, 5th, and the 6th grade.
Okay. Yeah.
Those are memories that will always be with me. Yeah.